Elizabeth Taylor lived her life as if it were one of her sweeping, passionate epics, her every dramatic turn captivating the attention of the world for decades. The violet-eyed beauty married a remarkable 8 times to 7 different husbands, cultivated an image as Hollywood's ultimate seductress of men. From a scandalous affair with Eddie Fisher to her tempestuous relationships with Richard Burton, Taylor's love life seemed the stuff of a script of endless intrigue and intensity. Yet, behind this carefully crafted public persona, there is a far more complex truth about her intimate life, one that Hollywood publicists, studio executives, and Taylor herself worked to keep hidden from public view for most of her career. As the years have passed since her death in 2011, biographers, historians, and those who knew her personally began to reveal a fuller picture of Taylor's romantic history, one that includes significant relationships with women as well as men. Elizabeth was far more complicated than the man-hungry screen siren that the studios marketed, recalled a former MGM publicist who worked closely with her during her peak years. Her appetites for love, connection, and passion could not be confined to the narrow boundaries of what was considered acceptable for a female star in that era. This nuanced understanding of Taylor's sexuality has emerged through decades of research and confidential interviews with her inner circle, along with the gradual relaxation of the strict secrecy that once governed Hollywood's treatment of its stars' private lives. What has become increasingly clear is that Taylor's romantic history included significant relationships with women, connections that range from brief, passionate encounters to deeper emotional attachments. Elizabeth didn't see love in terms of categories or labels, explained a close friend who knew her for over 4 decades. She fell in love with people who intrigued her, who matched her intensity, and who weren't afraid of her power. Sometimes those people were men. Sometimes they weren't. Today, we look at 6 women who shared private intimacy with one of Hollywood's most public figures, illuminating a side of Elizabeth Taylor that adds new dimensions to our understanding of a woman who, even in death, continues to fascinate with her complexity, contradictions, and refusal to live by anyone's rules but her own. Elizabeth Taylor's relationships with women reveal much more than added chapters to her romantic history. They offer an insight into the incredible complexity of a woman who lived life on a grand scale while trying to navigate the oppressive restrictions of her era. In a Hollywood where even a trace of same-sex attraction would immediately end careers, the private exploration by Taylor of relationships with women represented not only personal desire, but also a form of rebellion against the constraints placed on female stars. These relationships, long hidden behind carefully constructed public narratives about her marriages and affairs with famous men, provide a fuller portrait of a woman whose appetites for love, experience, and authentic connection were as outsized as her legendary beauty and talent. Number 1. Greta Garbo, the mysterious liaison. Of all of Elizabeth Taylor's purported relationships with women, perhaps none has fascinated Hollywood historians more than her supposed romance with the ultra-private Greta Garbo. These 2 icons of disparate Hollywood eras, Garbo, the mysterious Swedish siren of the 1930s, and Taylor, the violet-eyed beauty of the 1950s, seem, at first glance, unlikely companions. Yet, according to multiple biographers and industry insiders, their paths crossed in the early 1950s, leading to a brief but intense connection. She wanted mystery. Elizabeth wanted danger. They gave each other both, said film historian Margaret Collins, who has spent decades researching Hollywood's hidden LGBTQ history. Garbo was the ultimate enigma, someone who had walked away from fame at its peak. For a young Elizabeth Taylor, still very much under the thumb of the studio system, Garbo represented a kind of freedom she hadn't yet experienced herself. By the time they reportedly met in 1953, Garbo was in her late 40s and had been living in self-imposed retirement for over a decade. Taylor, barely in her 20s, was at the height of her MGM stardom, but increasingly frustrated by the studio's control over her image and her personal life. According to people close to them, the 2 women had been introduced at a small private gathering at the home of director George Cukor, famous for hosting discreet social events where Hollywood's closeted stars could relax away from public scrutiny. Cukor's Sunday afternoons were legendary in certain circles. For someone like Garbo, who guarded her privacy fiercely, These were rare occasions when she felt at ease. For Taylor, they offered glimpses into a real Hollywood far different from that which MGM wished the public to see. What reportedly began as mutual curiosity deepened. Several sources placed Taylor and Garbo together, just the two of them, at several resorts and private retreats over the months after their initial meeting. A caretaker on an estate in Ojai, California, related that the two women were there for a week in the summer of 1953, asking for complete privacy. Garbo was reclusive, private, and long said to prefer women. What was new about the connection with Taylor was the polarity. Garbo's Nordic reserve opposed to Elizabeth's passionate temperament, the fading legend and the ascendant star. For those who knew them, part of the attraction lay in their shared experience of being objectified by the Hollywood machine. Garbo, who had escaped it, and Taylor, still operating within its confines, both knew this surreal experience of being treated as eye candy rather than multidimensional human beings. The supposed romance was short-lived, but an important one for both women. For Garbo, it was a rare meeting of minds after decades of self-enforced solitude. For Taylor, it opened her eyes to life outside the routine marriages that studios had set up for her. Elizabeth would later reflect that Garbo taught her something she had never known. Privacy wasn't just something you protected, it was something you created. A longtime member of Taylor's household staff told how that Garbo showed her there could be parts of yourself you never shared with the world. Neither woman ever publicly confirmed the relationship, but the persistence of accounts from multiple credible sources suggests this connection, however brief, was a significant moment in Taylor's emotional and sexual development. It established a pattern that would continue throughout her life, seeking authentic connection beyond the boundaries of convention, regardless of gender. Number 2. Marilyn Monroe. The rival's embrace. In the 1950s, the Hollywood press manufactured a rivalry between Elizabeth Taylor and Marilyn Monroe, framing them as competing archetypes of feminine allure. Monroe was the blonde bombshell, the sex symbol whose overt sensuality masked her intelligence. Taylor was the dark-haired classic beauty, the lady whose refined elegance concealed her smoldering passions. The studios encouraged this perceived competition, knowing that nothing sold tickets like the suggestion of animosity between two of the screen's most desirable women. They were rivals in public, but in private they were reportedly wrapped around each other, claimed a former makeup artist who worked with both women during this era. The public saw what the studios wanted them to see: two women competing for the same spotlight. The reality, though, was much more complex and much more interesting. According to several Hollywood historians and insiders, Taylor and Monroe shared more than just the burden of overwhelming fame and objectification. They allegedly shared a brief but intense intimate relationship that both women took great pains to keep hidden from the public eye. Marilyn was the only person who ever made Elizabeth blush, says a longtime member of Taylor's household staff. I saw Elizabeth through 3 husbands during my time with her. She was never easily flustered, except when Marilyn would call. Then she'd become like a schoolgirl, all nervous energy and excitement. Their relationship reportedly started at a private party in 1955 when both women were at the height of their fame. According to people familiar with the event, Taylor and Monroe, who earlier had a cordial but distant relationship when in public, found themselves alone in a quiet corner of the gathering, away from the constant observation that characterized their public lives. Both were deeply insecure, over-sexualized, and drawn to forbidden relationships, said celebrity biographer Thomas Henderson. They recognized something in each other that few others could understand: the peculiar isolation of being desired by millions, but truly known by almost no one. What made the alleged relationship particularly poignant was how it contradicted the studio-manufactured rivalry. While the press pitted them against each other as competitors, Taylor and Monroe supposedly found in each other a rare understanding and acceptance that their public lives rarely allowed. Elizabeth was fascinated by Marilyn's vulnerability, by the contrast between her public image and her private self, explained a former assistant to Monroe. Marilyn, in turn, was drawn to Elizabeth's strength, her ability to command respect in an industry that had only ever asked Marilyn to be decorative. The encounters were few, but meaningful, reportedly arranged with elaborate secrecy, given the career-ending potential of such a relationship becoming public in the deeply homophobic 1950s. They would meet at private homes belonging to trusted friends, always arriving and leaving separately to avoid any suggestion of connection beyond casual professional acquaintance. There was genuine tenderness between them, said the former makeup artist. Not just physical attraction, though that was certainly part of it, but a real emotional intimacy. They shared things with each other they couldn't tell anyone else, about the pressures of fame, their troubled marriages, their doubts, fears, and hopes. The relationship reportedly cooled as their lives took different directions, Taylor getting into her tumultuous relationship with Eddie Fisher that would result in her fourth marriage, and Monroe becoming increasingly isolated as her psychological struggles mounted. According to those close to Taylor, however, she continued to have a soft spot in her heart for Monroe throughout her life and was even devastated by her death in 1962. Elizabeth kept a small framed photo of Marilyn in her private dressing room until the day she died, a longtime household staff member revealed. She did not have it displayed out front, tucked away in a drawer she opened daily. Nonetheless, it was always there. She would never comment about it if asked, just smile that sphinx-like smile she had when she wanted to keep something for herself alone. This private link between two of Hollywood's most iconic women suggests a reality far more complex than the simplistic rivalry narrative put forth by studios. In each other, Taylor and Monroe are said to have found not competition, but compassion, not jealousy, but an honest understanding. A short but meaningful relationship, granting both women a rare glimpse of truth in lives fundamentally built on carefully managed public personas. Number 3. Montgomery Clift's girlfriend. The unconventional triangle. The rich friendship between Elizabeth Taylor and Montgomery Clift is one of Hollywood's most famous platonic relationships. Following the film A Place in the Sun in 1951, they forged a bond so deep that Taylor would later describe Clift as the closest person to me in the world for many years. Their connection rested on a foundation of mutual understanding and protection, Taylor accepting Clift's homosexuality when it had the potential to end his career, and Clift offering Taylor friendship unsullied by sexual expectation. What didn't come to light until many years after both had died was a supposed complexity this friendship briefly took on when it expanded to include a third person, a woman who was romantically involved with Clift as part of his public heterosexual facade. Monty was gay, and Elizabeth was his closest female confidant, said film historian Robert Anderson. During a particularly tumultuous period in Clift's life, when he was maintaining a relationship with a woman as a cover, the boundaries between these relationships allegedly became fluid in ways that surprised all three people involved. According to several sources, the woman was not simply a beard for Clift, but someone for whom he had genuine affection. Their relationship, while not romantic in any conventional sense, represented a complex emotional partnership during a time when Clift was under intense scrutiny from studios concerned about rumors regarding his sexuality. She wasn't just playing a role. She genuinely cared for Monty, understood his situation, and had created a life partnership with him that worked for both of them, Anderson said. The situation purportedly became even more complicated during a time of crisis for Clift after his near-fatal 1956 car accident, which left him with injuries that would remain with him for the rest of his life. Taylor was one of the first to arrive at the scene after having dinner with Clift just before the accident. Indeed, famously crawled into the wreckage to pull teeth fragments from his throat to prevent him from choking. During Clift's long, arduous recovery, Taylor spent extensive time supporting both him and his partner, creating a uniquely intimate triangle as they navigated this traumatic period together. Elizabeth was there almost daily, helping with his care, managing visitors, protecting him from studio pressure, said a production assistant who worked with Clift at the time. Through this shared goal of protecting him, she became incredibly close to Clift's girlfriend, and that closeness evolved to something more complex. According to those with knowledge of the situation, what began as an emotional intimacy between the two women gradually developed into a brief, physical relationship ostensibly with Clift's knowledge and apparent blessing. She didn't want to replace Monty. She wanted to understand what he loved, said a member of Clift's inner circle. It was not a question of betrayal. It was about bonding and finding solace during an extremely stressful time when all three were joined together by their concern for Cliff's well-being. The alleged relationship was remarkably private, even to insider circles of Hollywood. Unlike some of Taylor's other rumored same-sex relationships, this link appears to have been known to very few individuals other than those involved. Never confirmed, but multiple studio insiders have hinted at a strange triangle, Anderson pointed out. What really makes this situation quite fascinating is how it resists reduction to some sort of simple categorization. It wasn't just about physical attraction. It was the complex emotional bonds of three people trying to navigate extraordinary circumstances together. The affair reportedly fizzled out organically as Cliff's improvement continued and the immediate crisis passed. All three remained close, but the old dynamics were resumed. As far as friends knew, it wasn't a dramatic or contentious breakup, simply a realization that it had all been occasioned by particular circumstances and wasn't going to work over the long haul. This affair, if the stories are correct, represents another axis along which Taylor thought about intimacy and connection, one in which emotional authenticity was what mattered rather than conventional propriety or expectation. She wasn't trying to replace Monty. She was trying to get a handle on what he loved. It's a perspective that not only helps one understand this particular situation, but also how Taylor felt about relationships throughout her life, filled with curiosity, emotional openness, and a willingness to follow connections wherever they might lead, regardless of social convention or expectation. Number 4. Eddie Fisher's secretary. The staff betrayal. Elizabeth Taylor's relationship with Eddie Fisher began in scandal. She was widely condemned for stealing him from her friend Debbie Reynolds and caused an even greater uproar when she left him for Richard Burton. What remained hidden within this very public marital drama was yet another layer of complexity. Taylor's alleged affair with Fisher's young personal secretary during the latter part of their marriage. During her marriage to Fisher, Elizabeth reportedly had an affair with his much younger personal assistant, revealed a former studio publicist who worked closely with the couple. In today's terms, it would have been a front-page scandal, but in that era, some secrets remained safely out of print. According to several people who knew them, the affair began in the early 1960s, by which time the Fishers in Taylor's marriage to Fisher were already appearing. Fisher's personal secretary, a woman in her early 20s, whom those who knew her describe as smart, discreet, and striking rather than classically beautiful, had become a fixture in their home. She oversaw Fisher's increasingly Byzantine schedule as he juggled his performing career with his duties as husband to one of the world's most famous actresses. She fell for the girl who took his calls and stopped taking his, says a former member of the household staff. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in their circle, but what could Eddie say? He had pursued Elizabeth while married to Debbie and thus had no moral high ground when the pattern repeated itself with his own secretary. The situation was further complicated by the power dynamic inherent in it. As Fisher's employee, the young woman was in a precarious professional position, but according to those close to the matter, it was Taylor who reportedly pursued the connection. She was attracted to the secretary's low-key efficiency and unobtrusive intelligence, which contrasted with Fisher's increasingly erratic behavior. The woman disappeared from public view shortly after Taylor's split with Fisher, said celebrity biographer Thomas Henderson. In that era, studios were efficient at making potential problems vanish, often with financial settlements tied to confidentiality agreements. What separated this purported relationship from opportunism was the reported emotional intensity. According to people within Taylor's circle, she developed real affection for the young woman, affection which complicated an already troubled marriage to Fisher and perhaps expedited its rapid demise. The tabloid whispers were of an affair that was torrid and emotionally volatile. Henderson then added, by most accounts, it wasn't just physical attraction, but a deeper connection. The secretary apparently gave Elizabeth something she wasn't getting in her marriage: attentiveness, emotional stability, intellectual engagement. Fisher was increasingly consumed by his insecurities about living in Elizabeth's shadow, while the young woman seemed comfortable in herself despite her relatively modest position. The relationship reportedly continued even as Taylor began work on Cleopatra, where she would meet Richard Burton and begin the affair that ultimately ended her marriage to Fisher. For a brief period, according to those familiar with the situation, Taylor was allegedly involved with both Fisher's secretary and Burton at the same time, reflecting the often chaotic complexity of her personal life. A longtime friend of Taylor's observed, she didn't see relationships in either slash or terms. She followed her heart where it led, often in multiple directions simultaneously. When Taylor's affair with Burton became public, creating the scandal of the decade, the secretary reportedly was fired from Fisher's service. Insiders say she was paid a large financial settlement in return for her silence and all but disappeared from Hollywood. She was paid well to disappear and never tell her story, said the former publicist. The studios in those days could create new names, new cities, new lives, all very efficiently, so long as there was silence. This pattern of relationships with staff members reportedly continued throughout Taylor's life, creating complex situations where professional boundaries blurred with personal intimacy. While fraught with problems from a modern perspective, these connections revealed Taylor's tendency to form attachments based on personal chemistry and emotional resonance rather than social status or convention. She fell for the girl who took his calls and stopped taking his a phrase that really captures the essence of Taylor's approach to relationships, following her heart wherever it led, regardless of expectations or conventional boundaries, creating a romantic history far more complex and nuanced than the public narrative of serial marriages to famous men would suggest. Number 5. Rock Hudson's best friend. The trusted companion. Elizabeth Taylor's friendship with Rock Hudson represented one of Hollywood's most poignant platonic relationships. Two extraordinarily beautiful people who shared a profound understanding of the burdens of fame and the necessity of maintaining public facades. Hudson, a closeted gay man forced to project a heterosexual image throughout his career, found in Taylor a trusted ally who accepted him completely. Taylor, perpetually objectified and misunderstood, found in Hudson a friend who valued her for far more than her legendary beauty. What remained largely unseen by the public, however, was Taylor's purported relationship with a woman who made up the third point in this triangle of friendship, a brilliant costume designer who was one of Hudson's closest confidants. Taylor and Rock were famously close, but it's the woman who was always with them that drew whispers, said film historian Margaret Collins. She was officially recognized merely as a costume designer who worked on several of Rock's films, but to those within their inner circle, she was so much more. She was an emotional support system, a trusted confidant, and allegedly Elizabeth's lover as well. According to several people who knew them well, the woman had been part of Hudson's protective inner circle for many years before Taylor came into the picture. She was one of the few people with whom Hudson could be himself, and thus she held a singularly privileged place in his life. When Taylor and Hudson became fast friends on the set of Giant in 1956, this costume designer was always there, at first acting as a connector for the two, later forming her own friendship with Taylor independent of Hudson. At first a friendship, it soon turned into something far more intimate. Sources close to the situation say, she and Elizabeth reportedly shared a travel companion arrangement for several years. In a period when female stars were supposed to be perpetually available to male attention, having a female travel companion was practical. It provided companionship and protection. It allowed Taylor to travel with someone she trusted implicitly, who could shield her from unwanted advances and provide emotional support without the complications that came with male escorts. This supposedly developed into a romantic relationship that continued intermittently for several years, conducted with extraordinary discretion given both women's public profiles. According to reports, Hudson knew of and encouraged the relationship, framing their connection as an extension of the trust and affection underpinning his own friendships with the women. It wasn't about labels. It was about intimacy on her terms, Collins explained. This understanding of relationships to follow authentic connections where they might naturally lead, without constraint, was characteristic of Taylor throughout her life. What lent this relationship particular weight, however, was its durability. Whereas many of Taylor's other reputed relationships with women were allegedly brief, This one reportedly lasted on and off for several years, developing an ongoing emotional attachment that paralleled rather than merely complemented some of her marriages. The relationship reportedly cooled off naturally, rather than breaking up in conflict, with both women remaining lifetime friends after the romantic component ended. There was no animosity, just a natural evolution of connection based on mutual respect and affection. One telling aspect of this relationship was how it integrated with Taylor's public life. Unlike some of her more secretive connections, this woman was openly part of her social circle, photographed at events, and included in gatherings with other celebrities. The romantic nature was carefully concealed, but she was hiding in plain sight as a close friend and trusted colleague. That is a pattern that mirrors Taylor's practical way of navigating the constraints of fame, keeping intimate relationships inside her professional circle in order to carve out private spaces in a very public life. Number 6. Her own housekeeper. The housekeeper. During Elizabeth Taylor's very public life, with its multiple marriages, health crises, and constant media scrutiny, her homes represented crucial sanctuaries where she could momentarily escape the relentless attention that followed her everywhere else. Within these private spaces, her household staff often became surrogate family members, privy to the real Elizabeth behind the public image. Indeed, several sources close to Taylor's various domestic arrangements have suggested that a housekeeper, in Taylor's employ during the late 1960s, developed a relationship with the actress that went way beyond anything professional in nature. The relationship, insiders say, became almost personal and intimate. Elizabeth reportedly had a live-in housekeeper whom sources said she was closer to than any husband during a stretch of loneliness, revealed a former member of Taylor's entourage. According to multiple accounts, this affection developed into a real romantic relationship that lasted nearly 2 years. The relationship began during a particularly difficult period in Taylor's life following her first divorce from Richard Burton in 1974. Having lost the great passion of her life and still recovering from health problems, Taylor was said to have found herself deeply isolated despite her fame and fortune. According to sources, the attractive woman in her 30s, quiet with dignity and discretion as a housekeeper, gave emotional support that eventually turned into something more intimate. The gifts, private travel, and hotel rooms that they supposedly shared became part of their routine, according to celebrity biographer Thomas Henderson. It became plain as day to those close to Taylor, but of course, this was all completely hidden from view. This housekeeper would travel with Elizabeth, sharing her suite while being officially registered in another room. They spent their evenings alone together when Elizabeth declined social invitations, and the household staff knew, though it was never discussed. What made this relationship particularly significant was how it reportedly provided Taylor with a rare sense of normalcy and privacy during a period dominated by extreme public attention. The housekeeper represented a connection untainted by fame, fortune, or Hollywood politics, according to insiders. She wasn't just a maid. She was a companion, and the one person who didn't ask for anything she didn't already have, claimed the former entourage member. Unlike the men in Elizabeth's life, who often sought her fame, money, or status, this woman wanted nothing beyond the relationship itself, something incredibly precious to Taylor after decades of people wanting pieces of her. The relationship reportedly concluded when Taylor reunited with Richard Burton, remarrying him briefly in 1975. The housekeeper was dismissed with an extremely generous severance package and strict confidentiality agreements, including a house in another state, financial security, and legally binding commitments, never to discuss her relationship with Taylor. This model of deeply personal relationships with household staff cropped up time and again during Taylor's life. Biographers and insiders describe how sharing daily life with someone who saw her at her most vulnerable without makeup, without public persona, sometimes literally naked, created bonds that sometimes transcended professional boundaries. These relationships were reportedly consensual and mutually beneficial, reflecting a consistent approach on Taylor's behalf, seeking an authentic connection beyond transactional interactions, so often characteristic of her celebrity life, finding intimacy with people who wanted her for herself, not what she represented.